Can you plant rain?
I think the water movement is 10 years behind the soil movement. Farming is now cool, permaculture and regen ag is cool, but we need to grow that a lot more. I don't think people are aware of how much regen ag can actually solve multiple issues. Like, you can kind of create a circle in your neighborhood to kind of get to share this knowledge about rain, and you can kind of start doing restoration.
Welcome to the Food Forest podcast. With us we have Alpha Low, who leads Climate Water Project, an independent platform investigating how to restore the water cycle, rehydrate soils, replenish groundwater, and reconnect climate and ecology via water. Because if you're planting a food forest, you are planting rain as well, which might sound strange for a lot of people. Because can you plant rain? Alpha, welcome to the podcast. I'm going to just start with that question. Can you plant rain?
Cool. Well, thanks for having me on this podcast. Great to be here. And trees, they transpire. And so in certain environments, when you plant trees, what does is that transpiration from the trees combines with the moisture that's blowing in from the ocean to create rain. So yes, it does. And there's actually a lot of science behind it too.
All right. Can you tell us a little bit more about what drove you into the interest of the water cycle and how you kind of became obsessed and one of the loudest voices out there right now about water system restoration? Is it something that when you were 6 years old you were already looking at the clouds, or did it come later?
No, it came much later. I kind of got involved in permaculture and eco restoration, and then I was in California where year after year, or every 2 years, we'd have a huge wildfire, and I was concerned, and all we're talking about is chopping down more brush and clearing, carbon-based vegetation to lessen the fires, and no one was talking about hydrating the environment, which seems also an intuitive solution, and so, yes, I found Zach Weiss's podcast where he's talking about the small water cycle, which is where you can, bring back the rain, because California's been losing its rain every decade, 10%. And then you could also hydrate the soils and the trees, and it's a lot less flammable. And so no one was really talking about it. And so I started getting into it, and I had a background kind of organizing people. And so we brought together a lot of people online, a lot of activated people who got to meet, and around this whole water topic, and then at some point I started writing this newsletter, and then started getting really interesting guests, and then I was also got more interested in the science, because all these eco people were talking about, or permaculture people, and I was like, is this for real? And I started studying the science, and there's over 100 scientists studying this, publishing papers, and so but it's somehow got lost in the whole carbon narrative, and no one's talking about the water narrative, even though a lot of climate scientists are working on this.
How do you position? So we all know the carbon tunnel syndrome. Everybody's looking at carbon, and carbon is like the most important thing according to a lot of people. How do you place the importance of carbon and water cycle next to each other?
Yeah, they're very synergistic. Like, basically the carbon and the water cycle feed each other. You need the water to grow the carbon, and the carbon through the small water cycle and through the way it helps recharge aquifers, it helps the water cycle. So you kind of need both. And I think that kind of gets lost in the mix, that they're very symbiotic relationships, and there's different states that it can end up in, these carbon and the water cycles, in less healthy or more healthy, and so you kind of want to work with them in combination, to restore both, restore the vegetation, and also to restore the water cycle. They kind of go hand in hand.
I've heard that when you restore the water cycle, the effect on CO2 on the climate is actually less. It's a theory I heard, but I've never really known if it's true or not. Do you know anything about that?
Well, it's very complex, the whole relationship. Yeah, and they're both involved in the thermoregulation of the Earth. And so when the carbon goes up, it actually then heats up the Earth when you have more carbon dioxide, and then that causes more water vapor to come up. So then that heats it even more. And so there's this positive feedback loop. And so that's actually what Manabe, who won the Nobel Prize for, and that started the modern climate movement, because before they weren't actually taking into account the water vapor effect. They just did the carbon effect, but actually you require both. But because it's a secondary effect that comes after the carbon, they never really mentioned the water, but that's why you got the Nobel Prize. And that started the whole modern climate movement in the 70s. 1979 was a Chani report. But interestingly, Manabe and Chani both also did research. Chani, the famous scientist whose report got the world its attention, actually did research back then to show that, when you chop down trees, you lessen the rain. And Manabe built the climate models that had the soil, so the rain could get into the soil in a simulation and then go back up and create rain. And so these are the two most important scientists that started the greenhouse climate movement. They also did research to show why soils and trees create rain, but somehow that gets lost in the mix. Actually, I forgot what your question was.
I was actually asking if when CO2 when the water cycle is working better, that the effect of the CO2 on the warming actually lessens. But that's just a theory I heard.
It's a very complicated thing, because water also affects clouds, and so lower clouds cool the earth, and then higher clouds trap heat and heat it up, and so there's these multiple effects: the water vapor as a greenhouse effect, and then also as a clouds, and also there's this transpirational cooling when it's kind of like sweating, and so it's a little bit complicated. And then the ocean also stores a lot of heat, and so when the carbon cycle kind of interacts with this water cycle, I think it's so complicated that's why there's a little bit, it's not totally clear how the full extent of how water is a thermoregulatory system on Earth.
Yeah, but it's interesting that we are already so advanced in so much different sciences, that right now we still have this terrain that we really have to find out what the possibilities are, because these theories, if they're proven to be true, some of them, they could really change the entire way how we look at climate, and also the way at how we can mitigate but also regulate the climate.
And the whole transpirational cooling is very key. Like the fact it's just like you're sweating, it cools you down. So when the trees transpire, that heat turns into something called latent heat, and then when that latent heat then recondenses into a water droplet in the air, that releases that heat. So you're shifting the heat from the surface of the Earth up into the atmosphere about 1 kilometer up, and that's really key, because even though you might have more global warming, if you're shifting the heat, upwards, at least the life can survive. So you still want to stop all the global warming, but you also want this kind of shift of the heat. You also want that to be there. And if you're losing all the water, then you can't do this shift of the heat upwards by 1 kilometer.
Yeah, I explain it a lot. For example, I gave a keynote on the climate change summit not too long ago, and I explained a lot. Like, okay, human, you're sweating, you're in your armpits. It's for the liquids to become a gas, it takes energy, it takes warmth. So the warmth is gone, like you say, latent. It's in the sweat, and it goes high into the atmosphere where it becomes droplets again. So you're like removing heat of an equivalent of around like 9.18 tons of TNT equivalent per hectare per day. And so like that's why we came to the calculation of 550 million hectares of trees you would like to plant to cool down the planet with 2 degrees Celsius. Do you think that's like the most effective way of cooling down the planet, or do you see other ways?
Well, I mean, I think it's a common. You also want to stop the whole carbon emissions,
of course,
and also you don't. It's like it's how you plant or restore forests is key too, because if you just do monocultures, it can cause problems, and if you do non-native species, you can actually draw up too much groundwater. And so it looks like you have a lot more trees growing. I mean, you do have more trees growing, but if it's depleting the groundwater, then it's not sustainable after a decade or 2 decades. So it depends. You want to look at what originally was the vegetation there and probably restore it to either forests if they were traditionally forests, or woodlands or savannas, if they were more traditional woodlands or savannas, which are less dense trees. And so, yeah, and you also want to make sure that these are not monocultures. So, yeah, so in general, the basic idea is good, that you want to plant a lot of trees to cool the planet. But you don't want to, like a lot of solutions, you can get carried away and actually not do it right too.
Yeah. We've seen enough of those examples already. Normally I ask this question at the end of the podcast, but I'm actually curious into already starting in the beginning with it. Like if I would give you 1 billion euros or dollars, so that's 10 times 100 million euros. What would be your, like, the first things you do with that?
Yeah, so a lot of the successful large scale restoration efforts, like in India and Maharashtra, where there's 8,000 villages, or the Great Green Wall of Africa, where that's probably the most massive restoration effort all across the Sahel, just south of the Sahara, to stop the desertification. And a lot of success, those efforts in that Sahel region weren't that successful, but the ones that were where they involved the community. And then, and in Albalao in southeastern Spain, there's a whole regenerating the water and the vegetation. And so that's a community. They facilitate hundreds of landowners and farmers and business people to work together. And so I think this kind of community bioregional model is key. So it kind of works with scientists and government, and in collaboration with people owning the project too. And so you could seed funding into these bioregional projects, and also make sure you're doing it right. And in some of the places where there's less rain, it's actually more important to restore the water cycle and then plant. And so there's a sequence that kind of works too. But yeah, I would be interested in the whole bioregional approach to restoration work. And then also, I think there's a lot of different sectors involved in this, like the business, the government, the academics, and the eco-restorationists. And they each have different parts of the puzzle, and they're actually not seeing it. In fact, they don't realize the other sectors are doing a lot of work around this usually. And so, for instance, there's a lot of climate modeling around this, but they don't know all the regenerative ag, how it changes the soil moisture. Soils can hold more water. And so if you put these into the climate models, then we could say, if we did this mass regenerative ag or agroforestry movement, this would shift the surface temperature by this much, and it would also restore the rain this much and lessen climate whiplash by this much. And so that's, like, for instance, why you could bring together all these academics who are working with all the eco people. And I think it's really important. And, in the eco world, sometimes I hear, oh, climate scientists don't know anything about this, but actually they're working on it. And then climate scientists are frustrated because 50 people read their papers and it doesn't get out more. And then it helps because then if you have this combination of academics and actual case studies, then when the government sees it, they have more trust because there's actually people who've done the restoration work. And then you also have academics who says, this actually happens in our models too. Yeah, and then that's also more likely that the business people will help fund this. And then we want to get the insurance sector. And there's different innovative business models that that can help actually fund it. And like insurance have a want to not have the water cycle collapse, because then they have to pay out huge amounts of money.
So, Alpha, you were involved in restoring the Iberian Peninsula. You're bringing together lots of people to think about it, to work on it. What's like your dream, your vision with that?
Yeah, so we did find a lot of really activated people who are doing restoration work or wanting to kind of do bioregional work, bring together the people in the area. And then also there was lawyers and business people and, various people who are interested in this whole project of restoring the Iberian rain. And so, yeah, I think part of the angle is to kind of activate it so that it's to similar. One of the things is to try and create something similar that happened in Albalao in southeastern Spain, where it facilitated these people initially to get together, and then they kind of created this movement. So we want to do it in Algarve in Andalusia, in the Balearic Islands, and you know, the various places in Iberia. So they have these bioregional things, and then kind of to get funding, so to work with, say, certain businesses or certain hotels in the region that actually want to fund this because it impacts their tourism, and so kind of to get the places where there's a bit more money to flow into this, helping the regenerative ag and all the regenerative land stuff. And then also possibly restaurants could have 1% that donates to the, you know, restoration of the water cycle, and, you know, there's agroforestry stuff in the area. So it would be nice to set that up, and then also to work with different hydrology managers, you know, county hydrology managers, because a lot of issues when we talk to the hydrology managers here in Spain, like, their concerns is that there's too much water in the wet season and not enough in the dry season, right? And permaculture and regen ag has a lot of these solutions to slow the water so it stays from the wet season into the dry season. And so they have an interest. And so, we are talking to some of these hydrology managers, and they want some feasibility studies. But if you can get a movement of hydrology managers around Iberia going, and then that kind of gets into the whole government, and then and so then we want to, at some, you know, connect with the government, because then they could do large scale restoration of wetlands, say, and fund this. And because, like, you know, there was a big wetlands project in Spain that did get funded, you know, set aside $1 billion for it. And then initially the European Union had set, I heard, that something like 100 million for this restoration to bring back the rain in Spain. And it didn't quite fall through. But anyways, there are interests from the government to fund this kind of restoration work and in relation to the rain. So I think to get it going initially at the grassroots level, and then, you know, we'll also work in the government level.
Yeah, most definitely. And if one of our listeners is listening right now, who wants to not only have a food forest for their pleasure, because people have food forests for a lot of reasons. Some people have it just because they want to become more self-sufficient. We have a lot of clients who have a hotel or have some sort of hospitality. We're, for example, designing a hotel in the Azores or an entire island in Argentina, where we're also restoring the land. Other people are doing it really also just to grow food and to sell the food as a farmer. But let's say that any one of those profiles really also want to grow a food forest to help to restore the water cycle for themselves, but also maybe as a piece of the puzzle with other landowners. What would you suggest them to do?
I think it's a great idea to grow these food forests on their land, and I think it does play a part in the whole, you know, the local water cycle and how it circulates. So it's kind of an important thing. And I guess you can learn from people in the region who have done it. That's often a good way, because there are certain specifics and local knowledge that are very useful. So, like in Spain, there is this whole tradition of dianas and this kind of, you know, traditional agroforestry techniques. So,
can you talk more about what that is?
I don't know too much about, but, you know, over 100 years ago, you know, it was a traditional, it's called DHYANA, I think, and it's basically a version of agroforestry that the oldest, you know, olden times the Spanish people did. And so it is actually present in a lot of places. So it's like a revival of that knowledge. And in a lot of places around the world, it's often like, it's easier when, you know, in Africa, in the whole Great Green War, they actually revived the Zai pits and the half moon crescents, which basically are kind of a swale, but in a circular shape. But because indigenous people did it there, it's easier, right? And then when Neil Spackman did it in Saudi Arabia desert, the indigenous people there had methods. And then the Chinese, when they did their sponge cities, they actually had ancient Chinese. And so if you look back at the ancient culture, there's often a lot of these cool eco and water methods. And so, in Spain, they have agroforestry, you know, in their tradition. It's just called by a different name. So, so I think learning with that. And then also, we are working with some hotels and trying to get give guidelines for the hotels, like how you can actually be different versions of how you can do better with the water cycle. And
that's cool. What can you tell some of these guidelines?
It's still kind of in the formation stage, but the idea is to kind of have a similar, like there's all sorts of different certification and kind of tell you how well you're doing sustainability wise, but we could do this for water.
Yeah, like for example, somebody's listening who has a hotel, like broadly, what could they do?
Yeah, so we can contact them and put them in contact with some of the hotels that are doing stuff. So, for instance, a lot of some of these hotels, they could have flooding, right? Because in the wet season.
Yeah.
And so that water, instead of flooding and causing a lot of damage, which actually a lot of hotels actually have to pay a lot of money, just to deal with this, you can do all sorts of things like have rain gardens absorb the rain further upstream, and you can do something called curb cut. So when it flows down the driveway or something, instead it flows into your garden and then helps replenish the groundwater, which then you can use it in the dry season. And so there's all sorts of these tips that hotels can do that actually save them a lot of money. And so
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it's like a kind of menu book you're creating where they say, okay, if you have a driveway, then like redirect the water to the garden, install rain gardens where water can infiltrate.
Like Brad Lancaster made this technique famous in Tucson, Arizona. But most hotels have no idea about this, but you can use it if you have a slope in your hotel that's causing you lots of flooding damage,
Yeah, 100% true. I'm going to turn on the light here because the light automatically switched up. Brad Lancaster wrote 2 amazing books about dry land water storing, or I don't know exactly what the titles are, but I have both his books and they're very, very thorough, I think. So if you apply those stuff to your hotel or to your property, then you're really doing a lot. So
you're trying to grow a food forest, there's techniques too. You can use these eye pits or these these half moon crescents they're called, where you basically, if you're not having enough, if you're trying to grow your food forest, it can be rain fed, because you kind of accumulate the rain in a certain way.
Yeah. Would you break it down, Alpha, into, okay, there are like 2 major things you can do, and the first is try to infiltrate as much water as possible, and the second, try to have as much vegetation as possible, but the right vegetation as possible. Could you say you could narrow it down to just those 2 points, or is that too simplistic?
Wait, what did you say the first one was? To absorb
to capture and infiltrate as much rainwater as possible, and the second to have as much vegetation as possible, but the right vegetation, of course.
So you want to not a polyculture. So
is there something missing from that list?
That would be reasonable. And then you could use gray water to kind of start the whole system too. So
that's also an important part, because we have so much gray water or black water as well that just is treated as wastewater, and we're not doing anything with it. But actually, it's a source of fertilizing and of water at the same time.
Yeah.
So that's maybe the third of the list, like reuse or just use all the water you have.
Yeah. Well, I guess or include it somehow in that water step. So usually, often you want to get the water right and then kind of get the vegetation right. I mean, or they can go at the same time too. So, but that's the whole carbon and the water cycle syncing up, kind of, to get it going.
Yeah.
And sometimes, like if you have very hard, in some places it's very hard, so the rain doesn't get absorbed into the water. So then you can break it up, or various things you can do.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, one of your colleagues, Ali bin Shahid, he's working with us on 10 Lives festivals, where we're creating multiple regenerative festivals, where people, where we kind of making regeneration sexy, and he's been like identifying parts of the Iberian Peninsula to check like what's the cheapest tipping point, let's say, what's the cheapest place to influence the water cycle, and the goal is then to identify it, and to organize festivals there where people go with thousands of people together to restore the land, but also to party, to learn about restoration, to have like an entire immersive experience. It's basically also social engineering because we're really creating change for those people coming. And one of the biggest goals, of course, is like water restoration. What do you think of that, Alpha?
Yeah. So, I think, along the coast of, the Portugal and Spain, like Algarve or whatever regions, like when the wind blows inland there, then if it's slowing the wind down, or it's kind of like recycling the water so it helps further in. So then there is that kind of effect that working on the coast helps when the wind blows it further inland. And then also, I think wetlands are really important, if you can restore wetlands. And then there's a whole the Tagus River and how it flows from Spain to Portugal. And so there's actually a little bit of tension around how much the Spanish can take before it goes into Portugal. But
Yeah.
there's other ways that maybe there's a collaborative solution if you can get a large scale restoration effort on the Portugal side, and then when the wind blows in, it actually creates more water for the river. So there's something like that maybe a festival could get something going, but they would have to be much larger restoration than just festival, but it can kind of seed maybe awareness in that area to then do larger scale restoration projects that can then lead to the rain coming back.
Yeah, nice. If you would be like the head of water water cycle restoration of the festival, what would be like the first things you would do, or like the most important measures you would take, the biggest focus points?
Well, if the soil is really hard, then you can kind of work with it to kind of like when the rain comes, that it does, like with certain swells or like little miniature these pits or whatever so that and then you can kind of put seeds in them with compost so that when the rain, so they grow on their own. So you could kind of do this kind of stuff around the festival. And then the festival itself could be more gray water. And it's good to know what the ecosystem was before then in the festival, so what it is you're restoring. So that's probably the safest bet, is to restore what used to be there. So do some investigation.
Yeah, no, definitely. Cool. You've you're I think when the podcast is gonna air, your book is already gonna be out. You've written your first book. Can you tell me a little bit more about it? What's the title, and what can people expect from it?
Yeah, it's called Restore the Rain. And so basically, it's kind of a documentary of sorts, like of this whole movement and of all the different scientists that have done work to show that land use affects the rain and in various aspects of it. So, following a lot of the key people, Milan,
Nice.
and then in Aeneas Salati, who a lot of people don't know him, but he in the Amazon, he pioneered this stable water isotope method that actually showed you can water molecules, so that they could see that the rain came from the forest. So it was the first.
He's the one that calculated that like almost 1 in 2 raindrops that falls on the Amazon was created by trees. He's the one who first found it out, right?
Yeah. So then he worked with Carlos Nobre and others, and the whole Amazon became a whole petri dish, and so many scientists worked on the Amazon because it was clear it was creating its own rain. But then there's also people who worked on the Congo a little bit, and so I talk about all these different scientists, and then also talk about all the key eco restoration people that have talked about the small water cycle, like Michael Kravich, Zach Weiss, Spakman,
Nice.
And then some of the soil people too, like Elaine Ingham and Gabe Brown, and the permaculture movement, like Bill Mollison was talking about how the trees create rain. And so kind of showing that these multiple camps were working on multiple things and trying to weave this larger story that a lot of people don't know about all this.
It's really a biography of the movement.
Yeah. So so I liken it to the microbiome movement, which was kind of a shock because like the whole Western medicine had kind of discounted the bacteria, and in fact, you had so many antibiotics is destroying the microbiome. But slowly over the decades, the different pieces came together, and then there's a soil microbiome too. People in there was the genomic stuff that could document all this. And so different enough pieces of the whole puzzle from like about 5 different disciplines, sub-disciplines got together. And so then it actually birthed this. And then it brought the whole holistic medicine, people who were doing this microbiome stuff, to actually then be the science actually covers it. And so in a similar way, I think there's all these different parts of the scientific thing, the soil moisture, the groundwater piece, the hydrometeorology piece, the cloud, like there's all these different pieces of work in different parts of the water cycle who are not necessarily talking to each other, but like they're now getting that stage that it's becoming more obvious. And then now the whole eco people who are made fun of perhaps for their permaculture or their restoring the rain, now we actually like the sciences. So it's kind of like when all the practitioners doing the microbiome is now validated by the science. I feel like the same kind of paradigm shift is happening in the whole land use eco, restore the rain.
It's really nice that you make that analogy, because there are a lot of similarities in that movement. Like in the beginning, everybody thought like, what the heck? It's crazy. What, trees make it rain, or what? It's crazy. Or your guts is like your second brain. And now, people know that 90% of your happiness hormone serotonin is created in your gut, for example. And there's this soil-gut connection. So it's just amazing. What's your biggest call to action in your book?
I think you can kind of create a circle in your neighborhood to kind of get to share this knowledge about rain, and you can kind of start doing restoration efforts. And so kind of work just initially to educate yourself, then to educate a group, and then to bring the different sectors in your local community, and it's really important, and to kind of get into the bioregional stage. And so as we kind of have all these different, the hope is that this book can kind of incite all these people around the world to start doing the local community level, and then we can kind of bring them all together, and so they can network and kind of it helps each other and say what stories they're doing in their region, and that can also work with and hopefully kind of get more investors and government funding, and kind of at the same time work with the academics too that can study it as people are doing it in their bioregional community. So there's a kind of this collaborative process going on.
Yeah, that's just beautiful. It's like the famous quote of Margaret Mead: never underestimate what a small group of people can do to change a history, because the only thing that ever changed history is a small group of people. And that's exactly what we have to do. Just start around you. Like, how can you and your neighbors do something with the water? And it's nice. Projects all across the world are showing it, that it's possible. Like the Pani project in India, where they restored so much in such a short period of time. Or for example, in Spain, La Junquera, where they restoring the Kipar River. Have you visited them yet?
No, I haven't. No.
Yeah, it's also like when we filmed our documentary Eat More Trees, they're one of our main characters in the film, Alfonso and Yannick, and there the river just stopped flowing because of bad water management, not their bad management, but because of extractive farmers, and it's just amazing to see how many people are working on it, and how much the conscience is growing. How much years do we have left to really turn the tide? Like I'm a soil guy as well, and what bothers me is the United Nations prediction that 2050 90% of our soils will be degraded if we don't do anything. What's the prediction with the water cycle? Do we have also have 25 totally years or?
But like a lot of our food systems depend on the groundwater, right? And so say in Almeria, where they, all the plastic greenhouses in that area, like
the ones you can see from space.
It's producing a lot of food for Spain and Europe, but it's surviving only because of the groundwater. So in 2 decades, there's going to be a whole food crisis. And similar in the U.S., like the Ogallala aquifer, this huge aquifer that in the Great Plains in the U.S. area, and so that's a lot of the food production depends on that groundwater, but it's already been drained so much. And so in about 2 decades, we're also going to have a huge crisis. And same with California, which produces a lot of food, has a groundwater crisis. So there is this looming, and then also, like in Colorado River in America, like all the states are depending on it. It's not clear if the whole huge massive river is going to collapse in 2 decades. And so they're putting so much pressure on draining water from it. It's not even properly reaching the ocean anymore. So there is this whole huge crisis in water that, a decade or 2 decades. I mean, it's really starting to happen. A lot of places have crisis in water, and it's led to a lot of civil strife. But I think in a decade or two, and there's not enough attention being paid to it, because it's like, okay, so you deplete all your groundwater, then what? And also we're depleting the rain each decade. There's less and less rain, so certain region.
Yeah. What's the safest place to live? Near the sea?
I don't know. I think there's so many different natural disasters for each place. It's hard to predict.
But like to have a stable rain, is it better to be more in a continental climate or more closer to the sea because you have the clouds coming in from the sea?
Well, the Mediterranean climates are the most dangerous. So basically California, Spain, South Africa, they're the closest ones to have the tipping point. The biomes change, because they don't get quite as much, or I mean, southern Spain is what I'm talking about, in southern Portugal. Because those areas, if you have 3 years of drought, it actually is really devastating. And so, because there's other areas like the tropical regions have a lot more rain. So I would say those are some of the most devastating areas. And then also that's why there's a lot of wildfires, because the whole biome is getting dehydrated. And then now it's spreading. So so I guess the tropical climates, you have a lot more rain, but then also because global warming gets a lot hotter. So yeah.
It's nowhere is perfect, and that's true. The Mediterranean is really so much at risk. I lived in the south of France in the Mediterranean. I remember like all the villagers going to one place, and we were like, where the hell are they going? We were following them, and then we just looked with the entire village to like the hill where we always used to walk, and it was like totally on fire. It was like apocalypse. It's very scary, and we need to restore 14 million hectares of land around the Mediterranean to stop the desertification. That's a lot. That's also one of the reasons we started the 10 Lives Festival movement. But
it's a great idea. Yeah.
Thanks. But like 14 million hectares, that's a lot of land. And a lot of that land is really inaccessible. So you could say, well, have machines restore the water cycle. Maybe we could use this Boston Dynamics dogs to like go on very steep terrain and dig some water infrastructure to train them with artificial intelligence so they can just automatically like create these water holding structures. Or we just need a lot of humans, but then we need an incentive for them to come, maybe because of a festival, or maybe because they're paid, or maybe for another reason. What do you think is like the best bets to accomplish this in the next 25 years? Because if the Mediterranean is desertifying, like the rest of Europe is slowly also going to follow. The same with California, the same with a lot of other places.
Yeah, so like in Albalao in Spain, the Albalao project in Spain, a lot of young people were leaving the region. So that was the basis for bringing a lot of people together to discuss what to do about it. And so that's when I realized I had to restore the land and the water cycles. So I think that's a good model for the West. So and then you don't need a lot of injection. They had a little injection of money, but I feel like that kind of money could be injected. And then, insurance companies, they're really concerned about all the payouts. So they could inject some money into this whole bioregional movement. And so, I mean, you could make it like the Pani Cup in India, where there was a little bit of competition between the towns, and maybe you could do some kind of reality TV or something. And then, Michael Kravich did it a lot in Slovakia, and and then, I guess in Africa, there's all sorts of interesting ways to do it. So, there's a lot of refugees that were moving from one country to the other, and then they needed land. And so they gave them land, and they worked with the native people and the locals to actually dig a lot of these eye pits, these swales, to kind of restore the land. And so I guess there's also ways to use people in crisis, like the refugees, or maybe homeless people, you could have them in the West, there's a lot of homeless people that could be restoring land that they can then live on, or I don't know. There's various techniques to kind of get creative about.
Yeah. Do you believe in technology solving it? For example, the Boston Dynamic dogs. I don't know if you've ever seen them. They're like these robotic
I
dogs
don't
that you
know.
can
I mean, I
push
guess
and they can carry loads, and maybe one day they'll be able to dig holes,
I'm not
dig
a big
swells.
fan of. I'm not a big fan of these solutions. I mean, they can kind of do one vector well, but I don't know. I'll be agnostic, but I think it's good to get people involved, so they're actually building connection, because we actually have to get connected to the land too. We're very disconnected from the land, and so having people just getting their hands dirty, you get the soil microbiome into your body, but you also build this psychological connection. And and having all these robot dogs maybe doesn't build a connection to the ecosystem.
No, it will be very strange if you like go on a very calming walk through the mountains, and then suddenly you have this pack of robot dogs. Maybe not ideal.
But maybe there's a way to integrate. Yeah, it's
yeah.
not like I'm against it, but I think there is. If you can kind of get people involved in this, it's part of like reconnecting ecology and people.
Yeah. And the nice thing with Alvelal is that there you see that there's an economic model behind it, and that's something that I really think is needed, because when you like say, okay, 14 million hectares are need for restoration, if you just go and restore it, and of course there's going to be financial benefits as well, because Valencia is not going to flow, or not going to flood, or other places are not going to flood. But if there's like a business model behind it, because there's a regenerative farmer on it, then that's super nice. But I sometimes still have the feeling that we haven't embraced agroecology yet, or regenerative organic agriculture, that we see farmers as the solution to our problems. Have you seen it in your work as well, that farmers are sometimes too much seen as the problem and not as the solution?
Yeah,
because they sometimes also are the problem.
I don't think people are aware of how much regen ag can actually solve multiple issues. Like it solves the whole pollutants in the water, the algae bloom issue, the soil degradation, I don't know, it's so many issues, right? And this whole water cycle issue. And yeah, I think if we can raise consciousness, because there is certain segments of population that is back to earth, and farming is now cool, permaculture and regen ag is cool, but we need to grow that a lot more, and maybe social media can help. And it's still only a small segment that thinks it's cool, but I think the more we can raise awareness that it's really cool, and maybe in schools where they're starting to teach about climate, it's like, okay, become a regenerative ag farmer, small scale or something, and yeah, or work together to build food forests in your schools and your libraries, and businesses should have food forest, like kind of like make it so that there's a way to make a living out of this too. So if you kind of start having, like the yoga movement took off because yogis could actually become teachers, and so if there's enough people wanting restoration of their water and their land, and also or building food forests, then you can actually employ a lot of people, because people now want them as part of for beauty or for coolness or whatever, for climate concerns. And so kind of creating that hamster wheel, it takes a little while of flywheel to kind of, the flywheel, yeah. So as it starts turning, more and more people want it, then more and more people pay for the work of the water restoration or the food forest people, or the eco restoration people. Then more people get into it, and it builds on itself. And so Water Stories by Zach White, they actually have people that they train, then give talks in their neighborhood. And so slowly after 2-3 workshops, people get interested, and then they actually get clients. And so yeah, you have to kind of do marketing in your bioregion to kind of get this movement going.
Yeah, of course. Before we wrap up this podcast, Alpha, we already know what you're gonna do with 1 billion euros. Or dollars. You're gonna look at mostly at involve communities into restoring landscapes.
Yeah, bioregional movement. Yeah.
Yeah.
Network.
And how would you like see things ideally in 10 years? Let's say we do another episode together in 10 years. What will you have done the last 10 years in 2020?
Well, I think the water movement is like a soil movement.
2036.
I think soil movement is the water movement is 10 years behind the soil movement. So I feel like governments are paying attention. So it becomes a world. It's like, yeah, hopefully it becomes as big a topic as greenhouse, like we realize it. And it probably should have some cool name, like the greenhouse that's very memorable, but like how you restore the whole, there's a couple key concepts like slow water, small water cycle.
Biotic pump doesn't sound very sexy, maybe.
Yeah, well, yeah, and there's actually a different scientific theory that's similar to the biotic pump that also draws in water. So whichever version is correct. But yeah, so some of these concepts, is weaved into it's. I feel like it could be integrated with the climate movement. So the climate movement has so much momentum. So we need to strategically think how to integrate water into the carbon story in the climate movement, and then that will help increase its momentum. So if we do that, and really make strategic connections in the climate thing in the next 2 years, then over the next 8 years after that, I feel like in 10 years, you actually would have really moved it. And I do move the water movement. I really do think there's a lot of hidden grassroots movement and also government movement and business movement that not obvious to the normal viewer, but it's building these connections. And the more we facilitate that, the more it's like the mushrooms that connecting mycelia then suddenly pop up. And so hopefully in 10 years, it's like, it's popping up everywhere and becomes a massive. And also because hopefully it won't get to more the crisis stage. That's why. But, if we don't do something, it's going to get more and more crises. And then it will definitely pop up too.
Definitely. Any last words you want to share before we end this podcast with listener?
Well, I guess I have a Substack too, the climatewaterproject.substack.com, and a podcast. If you want to listen, and and I think kind of educating yourself about some of the science in this, and then just think whatever sector you're multiple. A lot of us are in different multiple sectors, so you can be the bridge into that other sector, whether it be business, government, academia, whatever, to kind of to bring these ideas.
Nice. So you've heard it. Read his book, Restore the Rain: The Unfolding Scientific Revolution of How Life Creates Rain by Alpha Low. Follow him on Substack. Also follow his podcast, subscribe to it, and of course, like and subscribe to the Food Forest podcast as well. As always, you can see the show notes on foodforestpodcast.com. Learn more about the courses we give, the landscapes we design, about the 10 Lives Festival, about the Eat More Trees documentary, all different ways to inspire yourself, inspire others, and be part of the change. See you for next episode.